Have you ever felt that icy grip of fear, the kind that wraps around your heart and squeezes the breath from your lungs? It's a primal feeling, isn't it? One that whispers warnings in the back of your mind, telling you that something is terribly, irrevocably wrong. That's the feeling that settled over me on a seemingly ordinary night shift, a night that started mundane and devolved into something else. Stay with me, because this story, this memory etched into the darkest corners of my mind, is one I need to share, and maybe, just maybe, you need to hear. And if you find yourself drawn in, if this story resonates with that flicker of fear within you, then please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you want to hear more, because believe me, this is just the beginning. It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the chill of that night air, the fluorescent hum of the motel office, the metallic tang of fear on my tongue. It was 2016, a year that already felt heavy with its own burdens, and I was just trying to stay afloat. Life had thrown a series of punches, the kind that leave you reeling, questioning your footing, your direction. I desperately needed stability, something solid to cling to, and that's how I found myself staring at the bland, beige walls of the Sunrise Motel office. My friend, Michael, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty, had pulled some strings. It's not glamorous, he'd admitted with a wry smile, but it's a job, Sarah. An office job, like you wanted. He knew I was tired of waitressing, of the constant hustle and the fickle income. I craved routine, a quiet corner where I could just breathe. The Sunrise Motel, with its promise of an office job, however low-paying, felt like a sanctuary, a chance to regroup. The pay was indeed meager, barely scraping above minimum wage, but the office job part was the lure. I envisioned quiet nights, paperwork, maybe a little reading, a peaceful respite from the chaos of my life. Naive, wasn't I? Looking back, I can laugh, a nervous, brittle sound, at my own innocence. My training was swift, to put it mildly, or as I later joked, baptism by fire. Mr. Henderson, the owner, a man whose face perpetually seemed etched with a weary sigh, ran me through the basics in the mornings. 2 mornings. That was it. He showed me the archaic computer system, a relic from a bygone era, explained the check-in process in rapid-fire monotone, and pointed vaguely towards the security monitor, a wall of grainy black and white images flickering with the motel's silent vigil. Then came Michael's training, 2 nights of shadowing him on the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Michael was patient, bless his heart. He showed me the ropes, the late-night check-ins, the occasional disgruntled guest, the endless paperwork that seemed to multiply in the darkness. He even taught me the sketchy guest protocol. If someone looks off, he'd murmured, leaning closer conspiratorially. Mr. Henderson wants us to say we're booked solid. Don't argue, just say no rooms. The nights with Michael were uneventful, blessedly so. A trucker needing a room for the night, a couple seeking refuge from a late-night argument. The usual motel clientele. Nothing to hint at the darkness that was about to descend. I started to feel a sliver of hope, a whisper of maybe this will be okay. Maybe this quiet, monotonous job was exactly what I needed to heal, to rebuild. Then Mr. Henderson announced his vacation. A week-long escape with his wife, leaving me, with my 4 days of training, in charge of the night shift. Alone. My stomach clenched. Alone. That word echoed in my mind, amplifying the anxieties I had tried to suppress. You'll be fine, Sarah, Michael reassured me, clapping me on the shoulder. It's usually dead quiet. Just paperwork and maybe a check-in or 2. And the security cameras, remember? You're being watched over. He meant to be comforting, but the phrase being watched over suddenly felt less comforting, more like a surveillance state in my already heightened state of nervousness. My first night alone started deceptively calmly. The clock ticked towards 1 a.m., the hands moving with agonizing slowness. The motel was quiet, eerily so. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights, the gentle whir of the ancient computer, and the rhythmic thumping of my own heart. The office was a small, brightly lit box surrounded by large glass windows, offering a panoramic view of the motel property. The glass door was the only entrance, no night window, no barrier between me and the outside world. It felt exposed, vulnerable. I tried to focus on the paperwork, losing myself in the mundane tasks, anything to distract from the growing unease that prickled my skin. Check-in forms, inventory lists, the endless, mind-numbing bureaucracy of a budget motel. It was a shield, a flimsy one, against the rising tide of anxiety. And then he walked in. The bell above the glass door jingled, a sharp, startling sound that shattered the silence. My head snapped up, my heart leaping into my throat. A man stood silhouetted against the dim motel parking lot lights. Tall, maybe, it was hard to tell in the shadows. He walked towards the office, his footsteps echoing on the pavement, each step a hammer blow against my fragile composure. He reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The fluorescent light washed over him, revealing a man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. His clothes were unremarkable, jeans, a dark jacket. His face was ordinary, not menacing, not overtly threatening, just ordinary. And yet, something about him, something in the way he moved, the way his eyes seemed to dart around the office, sent a shiver of unease down my spine. "Do you have any rooms available?" he asked, his voice gravelly, a smoker's voice, rough around the edges. My training, Mr. Henderson's directive, flashed through my mind. Sketchy guest, lie, no rooms. But he didn't look sketchy, not overtly, just tired, and maybe a little off. But in that moment, trapped in the brightly lit box of the office, alone, surrounded by glass, my timid nature took over. I couldn't bring myself to lie. Not to his face. Not to anyone who seemed, even marginally, normal. "Yes," I said, my voice a little too high, a little too breathy. "Of course. Just for one." "Yeah," he replied, his eyes still flickering around the office, not quite meeting mine. "Just for one." I started creating the reservation on the computer, my fingers fumbling over the keys. My gaze flickered back up to him, a nervous, involuntary movement. And that's when I saw it. He started swatting at the air, violently, like he was fighting off a swarm of invisible insects. His hands flailed around his head, his face contorted in disgust. And then, the spitting noises started. Sharp, wet sounds, as if he was trying to expel something foul from his mouth. Spit, spit, spit. He spat into the air, onto the floor, around himself, like he was surrounded by flies. Invisible, buzzing, disgusting flies. My blood ran cold. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just tired. This was deeply unsettling. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Was he mentally ill? On drugs? Was this a sketchy guest situation after all? Should I have lied? Said no rooms? But it was too late now. He was here, in the office, with me. I tried to ignore it, to pretend I wasn't seeing what I was seeing. Not my business, not my business, I repeated silently in my head, a mantra against the rising panic. I focused on the computer screen, forcing myself to complete the reservation, to check him in, to get him out of the office, out of my space. "Room 212, I mumbled, handing him a key card. My hand trembled slightly as I reached across the counter. "Here's your key." He snatched the key card from my hand, his fingers brushing mine. His skin felt cold, clammy. He didn't say thank you, didn't make eye contact. He just turned and walked away, back out into the dimly lit parking lot, leaving me alone again in the brightly lit box of the office. But the silence wasn't the same anymore. It was heavy now, pregnant with unspoken dread. The image of him swatting at the air, spitting, replayed in my mind, a grotesque loop of unease. I watched him on the security monitor, a small, grainy figure walking towards room 212. My breath hitched in my chest. Please, just go to your room, I pleaded silently. Please just go away. Just when I thought I could breathe again, just when the knot of fear in my stomach started to loosen, it happened. A loud bang echoed through the office, making me jump, a startled cry escaping my lips. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to burst. I spun around, my eyes wide with terror, scanning the office, searching for the source of the noise. And then I saw him. He was back. Standing outside the glass door, his hand raised, still vibrating from the force of the slam. He had slammed his hand against the glass door. Hard. Deliberately. To get my attention. To scare me. My breath caught in my throat. Fear, raw and visceral, flooded my system. I recoiled, stumbling back from the counter, pressing myself against the back wall, as far away from the glass door, from him, as possible. My eyes were glued to him, wide with terror. He just stood there, staring at me, through the glass. His face was unreadable, blank, but his eyes were intense, burning, fixed on mine. Time seemed to stretch, to distort. Seconds stretched into eternities. We just stared at each other, separated by the glass door, two figures frozen in a tableau of fear and something else. Something I couldn't quite name, but that felt profoundly wrong. Then he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and grasped the door handle. My breath hitched again. He was coming back in. My sanctuary, my brightly lit box, was about to be invaded again. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. He cracked the door open, just a sliver, just enough to poke his head inside. And then he spoke. His voice was different now, not gravelly anymore, but tight, strained, laced with an undercurrent of something unstable. I can't get into my room, he said, his voice low, menacing. Why won't you let me into my room? The words themselves weren't threatening, not overtly. But the way he said them, the intensity of his gaze, the sheer wrongness of the situation, sent another wave of ice-cold fear washing over me. Why won't you let me into my room? It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Directed at me. My mind blanked. Panic seized me, paralyzing my thoughts, scrambling my reason. My training, Mr. Henderson's instructions, Michael's advice, all of it vanished, swept away by the tide of terror. My only instinct, my only defense, was to be helpful, to appease him, to make him go away. Maybe there's something wrong with your key, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Let me give you another one. It was the stupidest thing to say, the most illogical, the most self-endangering reaction imaginable. But in that moment, paralyzed by fear, desperate to de-escalate, to survive, it was the only thing I could think of. Be helpful, be polite, make him go away. I reached for another key card, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I avoided looking directly at him, my eyes fixed on the key card, on the computer screen, anywhere but his face. But I could feel his gaze on me, burning into me, judging me, accusing me. Here, I mumbled, pushing the new key card across the counter, my hand trembling violently now. Try this one. He snatched the key card, his fingers brushing mine again. Cold, clammy. His eyes. I finally dared to look up at his eyes. And what I saw there. I can't describe it. Inexplicable. Empty, yet burning. Hollow, yet filled with a terrifying intensity. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It wasn't hatred, not precisely. It was something colder, deeper, something ancient and malevolent lurking just beneath the surface. I felt like I was in absolute danger. Not just physical danger, although that was certainly present, a palpable threat hanging in the air between us. But something deeper, spiritual, almost. Like I had glimpsed something unclean, something evil. He took the new key card, turned, and walked away again, back out into the parking lot, towards room 212. I watched him on the security monitor, my breath held captive in my chest. Each step he took away from the office felt like a small victory, a temporary reprieve from the suffocating terror. As soon as he was gone, as soon as the door swung shut behind him, I scrambled for my phone, my fingers clumsy, fumbling. Michael. I needed Michael. He would know what to do. He had trained me. He had dealt with things. He would understand. I texted him, my thumbs flying across the screen, a frantic, desperate plea for help. Michael, are you awake? Something weird is happening at work. This guy. I don't know. He's freaking me out. Then I called. His number rang and rang, echoing in the silent office, each ring a fresh wave of anxiety. No answer. Of course not. It was the middle of the night. He was asleep. He wouldn't hear. He wouldn't know. I was alone. Truly alone. I called again. And again. Each unanswered ring felt like a rejection, a betrayal. My hope dwindled with each unanswered call. Michael, my lifeline, was unreachable. I was on my own. Just as despair started to creep in, just as I was about to succumb to the overwhelming sense of isolation, I saw it on the security monitor. Movement. He was coming back. Again. Trudging down the stairs from the second floor, back towards the office. Panic erupted. This time, it was pure, unadulterated panic. My carefully constructed composure shattered completely. Reason fled, logic evaporated. Instinct took over. Flee. Hide. Survive. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I spun around and ran. Ran blindly, desperately, towards the back office, a small, windowless room behind the reception area, used for storage, and, well, I didn't really know what it was used for. But it was back there. Away from the glass door, away from him. I slammed the back office door shut behind me and fumbled for the lock, my hand shaking so violently I could barely work the bolt. Click. The lock engaged. A flimsy barrier, a pathetic defense, but in that moment, it felt like a fortress. Trapped in the small, dark back office, my breath coming in ragged gasps, I pulled out my pocket knife. Michael had told me to keep one on me, especially for the night shift. Just in case, he'd said, his tone casual, dismissive. Just in case of what, Michael? Just in case of this? The cold steel of the knife in my hand was a small comfort, a tangible weapon against the intangible fear that gripped me. It was pathetic, I knew, a tiny pocket knife against whatever he was. But it was something. It was protection. It was something to hold on to. Huddled in the back office, heart pounding, knife clutched in my trembling hand, I listened. Silence. Eerie, oppressive silence. Had he gone away? Had he given up? Had he gone back to his room? A tiny sliver of hope flickered within the darkness of my fear. Maybe. Just maybe. Then I heard it. His voice. Outside the office, in the reception area. Louder now, more insistent, more agitated. Hello? He yelled, his voice echoing in the empty space. Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me? Do you not like me? The words hung in the air, chilling, absurd. It wasn't about liking him. It was about fear. It was about survival. But he didn't understand. He couldn't understand. He was trapped in his own reality, his own delusion. And I was trapped with him. My mind screamed at me. Call the police. Call 911. This is crazy. This is dangerous. It was the logical thing to do, the sensible, the safe thing to do. But something held me back. Timidity? Inertia? Fear of what? Looking foolish? Overreacting? Calling the police on a guest? My mind, still scrambled by panic, couldn't quite grasp the gravity of the situation, the true extent of the danger. Idiot. Absolute idiot, I thought to myself, even then, even in the midst of my terror. Why wasn't I calling the police? Why was I trying to handle this alone? Why was I being so passive? But instead of calling for help, instead of doing the sensible thing, I did the stupidest thing imaginable. I decided to negotiate, to reason with him, to take the situation on alone. Heroic? No. Idiotic. Pure, unadulterated idiocy. I'm just on the phone, I called out, my voice trembling, betraying my fear despite my attempt to sound calm, assertive. I'll be right out. Liar. I was a liar. And a fool. But I couldn't bring myself to admit the truth. Couldn't bring myself to confront him directly, to tell him to go away, to call for help. I was trapped in a web of my own making, woven from fear, timidity, and a desperate, misguided attempt to control a situation that was spiraling rapidly out of control. I started calling Michael again, dialing his number over and over, each unanswered ring a fresh wave of despair. Still no answer. Still nothing. I was alone, completely alone. Taking a few deep breaths, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart, trying to steady my shaking hands, I unlocked the back office door. Slowly, cautiously, I peeked out. The reception area was empty. He was gone. For a moment, relief washed over me, weak, watery, but relief nonetheless. Maybe he had finally gone back to his room. Maybe it was over. But then I heard a sound, a muffled sound coming from the bathroom, the public restroom, just off the reception area. And then I heard his voice again, not yelling this time, not accusatory, but murmuring, muttering, talking to himself, angrily. And then I heard the words, faint, distorted by the bathroom door, but unmistakable. Kill her, kill her. The blood drained from my face. My heart sank, plummeting into the abyss of pure, unadulterated terror. Kill her. Who? Me? Was he talking about me? Was he planning to do? Still being an idiot and not calling the police, my inner voice screamed at me, laced with self-loathing and despair. But still I hesitated. Still, I clung to the pathetic illusion of control, the delusion that I could handle this, that I could reason with him, that I could make him go away without. He came out of the bathroom, slowly, deliberately, like a predator emerging from the shadows. His face was still blank, unreadable, but his eyes were different now, wider, more intense, burning with a feverish light. He looked at me, and for the first time, he seemed to really see me, not just as an obstacle, not just as a voice on the phone, but as a person in his way, a person who was preventing him from something he desperately wanted, something involving killing. My voice was barely a whisper, a pathetic attempt at normalcy in the face of utter terror. Your key was broken. I stammered, my voice cracking, betraying my fear despite my desperate attempt to sound calm, professional. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room. Escort him to his room? Are you insane? My inner voice screamed, a chorus of self-recrimination and terror. But the words were already out, the offer made. And to my utter astonishment, he agreed. Okay, he said, his voice flat, toneless, but compliant. Escort me. He agrees? My mind reeled. He agrees? After slamming the door, after yelling, after muttering about killing someone, he just agrees to be escorted to his room? It made no sense. None of this made any sense. But in that moment, trapped in the surreal nightmare unfolding in the brightly lit office, any semblance of normalcy, however bizarre, felt like a lifeline. Thank God. Thank God. Thank God I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater. I thought frantically, a desperate prayer of gratitude amidst the rising tide of terror. With my arms down, I was able to hide my hand, my right hand, clenching the pocket knife hidden in my sleeve. A pathetic weapon, a childish defense, but it was all I had. It was something. Holding my breath, trying to appear calm, professional, helpful, anything but terrified, I stepped out from behind the counter. This way, I said, my voice still trembling slightly, but firmer now, more resolute. Survival instinct kicking in, overriding timidity, overriding fear. I started walking towards the door, towards the parking lot, towards room 212. And then I realized he was behind me, insistently behind me, too close, breathing down my neck. My skin prickled, every nerve ending screaming danger. He was supposed to walk beside me, to be escorted, not to stalk me from behind. My steps quickened, my heart pounding even faster. I could feel his presence behind me, a dark shadow looming over my shoulder, threatening to engulf me. We reached the staircase, the dimly lit outdoor staircase leading to the second-floor rooms. I started up the stairs, my legs feeling like lead, heavy, unresponsive. Sweat trickled down my back, icy cold despite the rising heat of panic. Continuously, subtly, I glanced behind me, checking on him, making sure he wasn't making a move. Was he going to attack me on the stairs? Push me down? Pull out a weapon? My mind raced, conjuring up every horror movie scenario imaginable. We reached the second-floor landing, the long, dimly lit corridor stretching out before us. He was still behind me, too close, his footsteps echoing mine, a morbid dance of dread. We walked down the corridor, past room after room. Each closed door a potential trap, a potential hiding place, a potential end. Then he stopped, abruptly, in front of a room. Room 210. Not his room. Room 212 was a few doors down. Room 210. A room that, I suddenly remembered with a fresh wave of icy dread, was occupied by a lone woman. A woman I had checked in just a few hours earlier. He stopped at room 210 and reached for the door handle. My blood ran cold. He wasn't going to his room. He was going to. I stopped too, a few steps past room 210, in front of room 212, his actual room. I forced a smile, a brittle, desperate, fake smile plastered on my terrified face. "Oh," I said, my voice too loud, too cheerful, too obviously fake. "That's the wrong room. This is your room." I gestured towards room 212, the room number clearly displayed on the door. "This is your room," I repeated, pointing at the number, hoping, praying, that he would understand, that he would listen, that he would just go into his room and leave me alone. This whole time, he was going to someone else's room. Someone else's room. And that someone else was a lone woman. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath, amplifying my terror tenfold. It wasn't about me. Not entirely. It was about her. He was after her. He looked at room 210, then at room 212, then back at me. His eyes narrowed, confusion flickering across his face, quickly replaced by something else. Something darker, something more sinister. Disappointment? Frustration? Rage? It was hard to tell, but it was clear, terrifyingly clear, that he had intended to go into room 210, that he had been actively trying to get into her room. After a long, agonizing moment, he turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked towards room 212. He fumbled with the key card, finally managing to swipe it. The door clicked open. He turned and looked at me one last time, his eyes still burning, still intense, still wrong. Then he stepped into room 212 and closed the door behind him. Click. The sound echoed in the silent corridor, a final, chilling punctuation mark to the most terrifying encounter of my life. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I didn't even breathe, it felt like. As soon as the door to room 212 clicked shut, I turned and ran. Ran back down the corridor, down the stairs, across the parking lot, back to the office. Ran as if my life depended on it. Because maybe, just maybe, it did. I slammed the office door shut behind me and locked it, double bolting it, triple checking it, as if a flimsy glass door and a simple lock could actually protect me from whatever that man was. My body was shaking uncontrollably, my breath coming in ragged gasps, tears streaming down my face. I was safe, for now. But the terror lingered, a cold, clammy hand gripping my heart, refusing to let go. I sank into the office chair, weak, trembling, collapsing under the weight of fear and adrenaline. It was over. The encounter was over. I was alive. I was safe. But the images of his face, his eyes, his movements, the words "kill her" echoing in my mind, they wouldn't leave me. They were burned into my memory, seared into my soul. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, my breathing started to slow, my heart rate began to subside. The shaking lessened, just a little. I was still terrified, still on edge, still expecting him to come crashing through the glass door any minute. But I was functioning again. Sort of. I checked the guest registry, my fingers still trembling slightly as I navigated the archaic computer system. Room 210. Occupied by Ms. Emily Carter, lone female traveler. And then I checked the next name on the list, the guest I had checked in right after Ms. Carter, the guest in room 214. Room 214. Occupied by Officer David Miller, police officer, from a few towns over. Police officer, Officer David Miller. Room 214. A wave of something washed over me. Relief, hope, desperation, a combination of all three. A police officer, in the motel, just a few doors down from him, from room 212, and just a few doors down from Ms. Carter, in room 210, the woman he had tried to get into. I felt bad, terrible, guilty, ashamed, confiding in a guest, bothering a police officer on his night off. It felt unprofessional, inappropriate, weak. But the fear was too strong, too overwhelming to ignore. I couldn't just pretend nothing had happened. I couldn't just go back to paperwork and pretend that I hadn't just been face to face with something terrifying. Taking another deep breath, steeling my nerves, I picked up the phone and dialed room 214. My hand trembled as I held the receiver to my ear. Please answer, please answer, please answer, I pleaded silently. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. And then someone answered. A man's voice, deep, calm, authoritative. Room 214, Miller speaking. Relief washed over me, so profound it almost made me weak. Officer Miller? I stammered, my voice still shaking slightly. This is Sarah from the front desk. I don't want to bother you, but something happened and I don't know what to do. I poured out the story, the words tumbling out of me in a rush, a torrent of fear, adrenaline, and desperation. I told him about the man, the swatting, the spitting, the door slamming, the wrong key, the kill her whisper, the escort to room 212, the realization about room 210, about Ms. Carter. I told him everything, leaving nothing out, desperate for help, for guidance, for protection. He listened patiently, silently, without interrupting, without judging. When I was finally done, breathless, tearful, and trembling, he spoke. His voice was still calm, still authoritative, but now, laced with something else. Concern and understanding. Okay, Sarah, he said, his voice reassuring. Okay, stay in the office. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone unless it's me or another police officer. Do you understand? Yes, I whispered, relief flooding through me again, stronger this time, a wave of gratitude washing away some of the fear. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be right down, he said. Just stay put. And stay safe. He hung up, and I just sat there, in the office chair, locked in the brightly lit box, waiting. Waiting for Officer Miller. Waiting for something. Anything. But not alone anymore. Not completely alone. Help was coming. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe. And to hope. Just a little. Officer Miller arrived quickly, knocking firmly on the glass door. I peeked through the security peephole, verifying it was him before unlocking the door and letting him in. He was in plain clothes, thankfully, not in uniform, which made the whole situation slightly less official, less terrifyingly real. He had a kind face, a reassuring presence, and his calm demeanor helped to soothe my still shattered nerves. He listened to my story again, asking clarifying questions, his brow furrowed with concern. He took down the man's room number, 212, and Ms. Carter's room number, 210. He promised to keep an eye on things, to patrol the motel discreetly throughout the night, to make sure both Ms. Carter and I were safe. He even offered to stay in the office with me for a while, but I declined, feeling slightly less panicked in his presence, and wanting to let him do his job, to patrol, to protect. He did patrol. I saw him on the security monitor, a reassuring figure walking through the parking lot, checking the stairwells, his presence a silent promise of safety. Knowing he was there, just a few rooms away, just a phone call away, made the rest of the night bearable. Not pleasant, not comfortable, but bearable. The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows, but it was diminished, contained, managed. The next night, I was still terrified to go back to work. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made me jump. But I had to go. I needed the job. I needed the money. And surprisingly, Officer Miller had offered to stay at the motel again, for another night, just to make sure everything was okay. His kindness, his willingness to help a stranger, was overwhelming. It restored a tiny sliver of my faith in humanity, in the face of the darkness I had encountered. That night, the man came back. Just as I was starting to think maybe it was over, maybe he was gone, maybe it was just a terrifying one-off incident, he returned. It was late again, around 2 a.m., the motel quiet, the air heavy with unease. He walked up to the office door, his face blank, expressionless. But this time I was ready. This time I was prepared. This time I wasn't timid, wasn't paralyzed by fear. I was scared, yes, but I was also resolute, determined. I wasn't going to let him scare me again. I wasn't going to let him hurt anyone. I kept the doors locked. He rattled the handle, tried to push it open, peered through the glass, his eyes searching for me, finding me behind the counter, behind the locked door. "We're all booked up," I said, my voice clear, firm, surprisingly steady. "No rooms available tonight." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes still burning, still intense. But something was different. The power was gone. The menace was diminished. He was still unsettling, still creepy, still wrong. But he was no longer terrifying. Not in the same way. He just stared for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, back into the night. And I watched him go, on the security monitor, until he disappeared from view. And I breathed again. Relief, stronger this time, more complete, washed over me. He was gone. He was really gone. When Mr. Henderson returned from vacation, I told him everything. I recounted the story, the swatting, the spitting, the door slamming, the kill her whisper, the police officer, the return the next night. I expected understanding, concern, maybe even gratitude. He listened, his face impassive, his eyes weary. When I was done, he sighed, that familiar, world-weary sigh, and shook his head. "Kids these days," he muttered. "Too sensitive. Probably just drunk. Or on something. You should have just told him we were booked." That was it. That was his reaction. Dismissal. Disbelief. A shrug of indifference. He didn't take it seriously. Not at all. He didn't understand the terror, the danger, the sheer wrongness of the encounter. He just saw it as a drunk guest. A minor inconvenience. Something to be dismissed, ignored, forgotten. I was stunned, deflated, disheartened. I had faced something terrifying, something potentially dangerous, and his reaction was this? Dismissive indifference? It felt like a slap in the face, like he was invalidating my fear, my experience, my trauma. But I needed the job. I needed the money. So I stayed. I continued to work the night shift at the Sunrise Motel for the next year. And in that year, many other strange encounters happened. Strange guests, strange noises, strange occurrences in the dead of night. The Sunrise Motel, it turned out, was a magnet for the unusual, the offbeat, the downright weird. But that first night, that encounter with the man in room 212, that was the worst. That was the one that stayed with me, that haunted my dreams, that changed me, irrevocably. It taught me a lesson, a hard lesson, about fear, about danger, about the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of the ordinary, and about the importance of standing your ground, of trusting your instincts, and of calling the police when you're feeling scared. Something I should have done that night, something I will never forget again. But was that truly the end of the story? Did that man, that unsettling figure with his swatting hands and whispered threats, simply vanish into the night, never to be seen again? Or was there more to this story, A lingering shadow, an unspoken sequel? What happened to Ms. Carter, the lone woman in room 210? Did she ever know how close she came to danger? And what about Officer Miller, the kind police officer who offered his help? Did our paths ever cross again? These questions linger, unanswered, in the back of my mind. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows stretch long, I find myself wondering, was that man just a disturbed individual, a harmless lunatic? Or was he something else? Something darker? Something predatory? Perhaps, one day, I'll share more about my time at the Sunrise Motel, the other strange encounters, the unsettling feeling that never truly left me. But for now, this story, this memory of that terrifying night, is enough. It's a reminder, a warning, a lesson learned in the crucible of fear. So what do you think? Have you ever had an experience that chilled you to the bone, that made you question the safety of the ordinary world? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories from my time at the Sunrise Motel, if you're curious about what other strange things lurked in the shadows of that budget motel, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know you want a part 2. Because believe me, this story, terrifying as it is, might just be the tip of the iceberg. And the darkness is always waiting in the wings.